and welcome to another brand new season of the Public Speaking Expert podcast. And I'm super excited about today. You'll notice something's very different, something's changed, something has metamorphosized into something else completely. There is no Jose. There's no Jose, ladies and gentlemen. And for those who've been following us for a while, it's because what happened was is I met Jose and I ate him. That's what happened, and he is now being digested in my belly. No, I'm only kidding. Jose's gone in a different direction. He's gone in a different way. We love him. We're going to miss his energy, his humor. But that's what happens. People come, people go. People have to fly the nest. They have to hatch the egg, poke their head out, and learn to fly like a beautiful butterfly. And that's what Jose is doing right now. So we wish him all the best. And today I have a guest, and the reason I haven't used the normal intro for those who've been following for a while is because it's got Jose's name in it. And it's just a bit weird to go, please welcome your host, Elliot and Jose, and Jose's not there. But I do instead today have an incredible guest, which we're going to hear all about. Let me start the episode like this. Do you know if you're carrying around trauma? Now, there's big trauma and there's little trauma. Trauma. Anyway, we can discuss how to pronounce it. Are you carrying around trauma? And how is trauma affecting your ability to influence, your ability to step up, your ability to speak, right? So if we talk about it from a speaking point of view, how does it affect your ability to stand on stage, virtual or not? How does it affect your ability to express yourself, to communicate? So today we're going to have a wider conversation with Michelle, who's our guest, who's going to give us all her background in a second. But we're going to talk about trauma and the importance of actually dealing with it. If you're going to go out there and you're going to be a leader, you're going to impact industries, you're going to impact communities, you're going to stand on stage, the virtual or not. If you're in some way want to influence people, the question is, do you need to overcome your trauma? That is an interesting question. And for that, I have the one and only Michelle McMaster here, who's going to discuss why we must deal with our big T's and our little T's, because it's our little T's that might run the show while we might be focused on the big T's. But we'll explain all about that. Michelle looks confused by herself. Maybe I need to stop talking about China and hand it over to the expert. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the Public Speaking Expert podcast. How are you?
Hi, Elliot. I'm good, thanks. I don't think I was confused until I heard all of that. Now I think I am.
Oh dear. Well, all right. That's the end of this podcast. So thank you for joining everybody on LinkedIn. If you have a question, we'll keep an eye out. If everyone on YouTube, you have a question, say hello. But Michelle, tell us a little bit about, first of all, what you've done to get to this point today. And then let's talk about big trauma, little trauma, big T, little T. Over to you.
Okay, so just a little bit of background, which is over 40 years later has been my working life. I won't say career, but it's been my working life. And the majority of that has been spent in health and social care. And the majority over the past 15 to 20 years has been mental health, suicide prevention. And more recently, over the last maybe 7-8 years, has been specifically focused on trauma and trauma recovery. And that's been through all sorts of, I've worked within charities, I've worked in the statutory sector, I've trained in social work, I've trained in a lot of additional modalities. And my interest in trauma has come from the need that has been so clearly there for so long. And I wasn't finding that it was being met within a lot of the services I was in. So I have gone down that road and now run my own private practice and consultancy and do some training. I taught for years in university. So yeah, and speaking.
And speaking, yeah. We just remind you of that. And speaking. So let's deep dive into the topic. Okay. So is there anybody out there that has zero trauma in their life? Is there anybody out there that literally has no traumatic events? Is that possible?
It's possible. I don't think it's very likely. However, I would start at the very beginning by saying the last thing I would want to do is to go down a road that almost pathologizes trauma. So to me, trauma is anything that affects us in a way that we feel it's too much to cope with, too much to bear. But that can come and can go. And depending on the environment around us or our background or our history, for the majority of us, we can face those really tough times and come through them and be just as sound as we were before, if not more so.
So trauma can be anything from dropping an egg on my foot to really terrible, horrific stuff that might have happened to me or I've witnessed.
Yeah.
So anything that affects my ability to
yes, it can be very momentary and passing and fleeting.
Yeah.
and may have very little, if any, impact whatsoever, right through to the other end of the extreme, obviously, where there is either chronic, long-term, ongoing experiences, events, situations that are affecting us, or one huge, massive impact from one event or one incident and anything in
Okay.
between.
So I've had the pleasure of working with you, and we were talking a little bit off camera a minute ago. So, has trauma rear, reared an uglier head in the last couple of years? And let me talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Um, has it, is it more apparent that trauma is far more present in people's lives because of the disruption we had with being in lockdown, because of the uncertainty currently? Is it really surfacing for people now?
I would say absolutely yes to that. I think there is a lot of evidence and research being done right now about the mental health needs, not just
Uh-huh.
within our local communities, but globally. The World Health Organization have produced a report just this year, which has demonstrated really clearly, for example, that rates of depression and the more severe versions of anxiety have increased by almost 25% globally
Wow.
since the pandemic.
Globally.
Globally, since the pandemic.
So what's that? If there's 7 billion people in the world, that is a huge amount. That's
Yeah,
a quarter of the
yeah,
people in the world.
yeah,
It's increased by. So it's
yeah,
affecting that
yeah,
much. Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
And that's increased. But that's going by the measurable increase. So
Yeah,
that does
yeah, yeah.
not include those who do not fall
We're
under
not
any
saying
services,
anything.
who are not saying anything, who have been either hiding in corners or finding some support some other way, but they're not necessarily being seen. So it's at least, I would say it's at least 25%. And that's depression and anxiety. That's not even those impacted by trauma. So I can give you some anecdotal examples of how I have personally seen the shift
Yeah, yeah,
in
please do.
people.
Share away. Anything that
Um,
impacts our listeners and our audience is
yeah,
interesting.
so I have been working with quite a few folk in their 70s and 80s this year alone. I rarely did that pre COVID, but I have
Wow.
had people of that age who have either come to me or been referred to me because they had managed their whole lives. They had managed really tough times. They had come through so much and they had learned how to live with that, and they learned how to be okay and how to, manage their world and enjoy themselves. And then when COVID hit and lockdown came, so many of those people were suddenly find themselves cut off from all their support systems, from all their outlets, from the people, the places, the activities
Interactions.
that they were familiar with,
Yeah.
and they were being given, and understandably so, being given messages that were full of fear and full of uncertainty and unknown for the future, and particularly at that phase of life for a lot of people, if that has brought them back even unconsciously to times when that happened before. So a lot of the people I've worked with, for example, have been through war. I live in Northern Ireland, so I have people here who have lived through our troubles in Northern Ireland, but who had come through them even through the worst of circumstances and survived. And anecdotally, in Northern Ireland, the number of people who spent a lot of time during lockdown saying, I understand we need to wear masks. I know why we need to wear masks, but I don't know why when I see one, particularly a black mask, why I suddenly feel so very, very anxious. Of course, in Northern Ireland, black masks in the 70s were associated with something very sinister.
Hmm.
And so this is where the impact of trauma comes in, because if it impacts on our visceral body, it's not necessarily something we remember, but it's something our body holds onto and our body stores it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of writing about that, about how the body keeps the score. That's a fairly well-known book by a gentleman called Bessel van der Kolk, and he has written that phrase, the body keeps the score, because it is about saying our body stores it whether we remember it or not, and then it can come back to us and we don't
Yeah.
know why. So 40 years later, we don't know
And
what's going on.
suddenly
We
as
don't know
well,
why.
right? It can
Yeah,
be like
yeah,
poof.
yeah,
It's not like you get
yeah,
warnings, right?
yeah.
So it's quite interesting. And but trauma isn't, it's not limited to war or blood or
No.
explosions, right? Or sexual occasions. Like myself, I when I hear you speaking, I remember what triggered me when I was 12. I suffered sexual abuse. I talk about this in my books. It's nothing I haven't talked about in one of my books. And I buried it. I remember I went home that day, I had a bath, I covered myself in aftershave, which is a weird thing to do, but I just thought that was a way of cleansing yourself. And then I remember I didn't think about it. And then it was when I was working with a particular chain, burger chain, which I won't say any names. And this manager just stupidly reached down and grabbed me. Like, and he went, "Are you a man or a mouse?" And I guess he was joking. I mean, it's before social media, it's before you go online, and it's like one of those like. And I just remember everything resurfaced for me. I was angry for days. I remember having um like my mouth hurt because I was clenching my jaw so much out of anger. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I realized what this has brought up for me, something I'd buried for what
Yeah.
was 5 years back then. And that's when I sought counseling and started to actually deal with what happened when I was 12, right? But I think there's also what I was talking about, the little T's, is the little traumas that aren't, I mean, I'm not here to belittle or make something big or small, that might not appear to be traumatic, but affecting our ability. So, masks that represent war or sexual abuse, something like that, those are one, but there are little things, right? Like your parents shouting at you in a certain way, or, you experiencing someone laughing you at class, and they're not considered to be, again, I'm saying inverted comma, big things, but they're traumatic enough to influence your
Yes.
behavior, and right. So, what are some of those you've come across recently?
So some very simple examples of that would be something noises. So sounds that we
Ah,
hear, and if something, I mean, right now as I'm speaking, I can hear ladders outside, which is actually unusual
uh-huh.
in where I am because I'm quite high up. But for some people, they may have been in a situation where something has dropped right beside them, and they've had the famous near miss,
Yes, yes.
or they've had something on the road where somebody has driven out and almost hit them, or somebody has been, a near miss with a bicycle, whatever it might be. Those at the time are processed. They're not a trauma. You're not hit, you're not hurt at the time, but you react. And if
Mm,
that was repeated again at another time in another way with a similar sound or situation that was another near miss, it doesn't take that long before our bodies begin to recognize that as I need to be very wary of this world around me. Now, that's a small t because it hasn't had a direct physical impact, but
right.
it has impacted on our nervous system. And it's the nervous system that counts, and that can store lots and lots of small t traumas. So something like being at a beach and in the water and swimming. And I can recall a time when I have no idea what age, but I know I was young, and walking out into the sea and dropping unexpectedly with, in fact, my little sister into a dip that was in the sand,
Yeah.
but quite far out. I mean, we were young, but up to about waist height. And the drop was sufficient for both of us to go suddenly underwater. It wasn't for long. It can't have been more than a split second. We were being watched. There wasn't any risk at that point. But that does not mean that I don't remember to this day what that felt like, to suddenly feel like that I was drowning. And it was a split second.
I think Michelle's frozen there. So let's see what if she comes back shortly.
Okay, I'm
There you are. You're
here.
back. You froze
I'm
there for
here.
a second.
I could hear you completely. So apologies. It
That's
didn't
okay.
freeze at this
Technology,
side.
you gotta love it, and that's why we do it one take here. No editing, no cutting. It's live. That's
So
so you talked about you never forget that feeling of dripping or
yeah,
drowning. That's why
yeah,
we cut you
yeah,
off. So I
yeah.
mean, we didn't cut you off. You froze.
So
So
no,
carry
I
on.
so I mean I'm happy to get into water and I swim and I have no real issue with that. But if I suddenly find myself, it would take a lot for me to have to jump into water, or if I fell out of something into water, I know that the response I would have would be quite immediate. I'm aware of it. I'm conscious of it. So I have, I have the capacity to process that differently.
Yep.
But if you're not aware and you're not conscious of how those things impact you, then you can just store them up one after the other, and you can begin to lead an almost a very nervous version of life. So
Uh-huh.
if you're spoken to, you mentioned, for example, if you're a child and somebody humiliates you, somebody speaks back and says, that's not important now, leave it aside, or a child runs in and they're playing happily and somebody just says, shush, 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 we've something else to do. you can begin to store those messages of you shouldn't be heard, you can't be seen, you need to hold yourself back, and you can your body physically begins to withdraw a little bit, and that can obviously build up over time.
Interesting, interesting. So it's the whole, your sensories pick things up. It's almost like your nervous system is a ongoing speed camera that's continuously flashing like people, situations, smells, sounds that might be hazardous to us. It's going shin,
Yeah,
snap, snap.
yeah,
Don't want to feel that. That's dangerous. Be careful.
yeah,
That's not right. It's
yeah,
going snap, 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 snap. I
yeah,
mean, hopefully not all the time, because that will be just overload for your nervous system. But that's basically what it's doing, right? It's capturing that second, that
yeah,
moment, or that long term,
yeah.
and then boom. Which is why I guess I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear if there's been a rise in PTSD in the last couple of years. If stuff has
Yeah.
surfaced more for people now, we're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder.
So there would be a couple of things from that, in specifically in relation to PTSD, which is our awareness of what PTSD is, how it affects people, what type of situations affect it has changed over the years. Even the terminology. A lot of people will now say PTS as in post-traumatic stress, but they won't. They will leave off the disorder because
Okay.
it's no longer considered to be a disorder. It's a response to situation or situations. So there is a rise in PTS along with depressions and anxieties and a whole range of other mental health issues. You've mentioned a couple of things there, though. I just want to pick up on the speed camera image is a lovely one in terms of just that constant being on alert,
Yeah.
just being
Yeah.
on alert in relation to the world around you. And you mentioned alongside that the senses, our senses. Our senses are the most essential part of how we store anything in this world. And that goes directly into our nervous system. We live in a culture, certainly in the West and certainly in the UK, we live in a culture that is primarily verbal. And we believe that so much of what we need to do or need to process is cognitive in our frontal cortex of our brain. But the reality is that all the research over the last 30, 40 years in relation to trauma specifically and how it's stored is really clear that our sensory nervous system overrides anything that's in our brain. Therefore, that high alert is not a conscious awareness. It is a visceral response to colors, smells, tastes, textures. Our five senses are involved. And if we have had a situation or even a memory, so I think I work a lot with people who have been bereaved in all contexts, and it would be very common years after an event to, for example, walk outside a door and see someone in a blue overcoat and find themselves going and not even knowing what's happened, but it's simply a visual reminder through our senses of our sight of
Yep.
someone who had the last thing they wore was a bright blue coat, for example. Or aftershave, you mentioned aftershave as well. It's very, very common for people to walk into like a chemist
Uh-huh.
and and have a smell, and smell would be one of the most powerful senses that we have. And our body takes us back to a time that we may or may not remember, but our body takes us back regardless and puts us onto alert because our nervous system is there to protect us.
Yeah.
It's there to keep us safe. So if it detects what it perceives to be threat, even if it's not an actual threat, the perception alone is enough to send our body into high alert. And then the response of our body sends a message to our brain, which then says, be careful. And then we change what we're doing at that moment.
Hmm. I feel we could deep dive into this for ages, and I think we also need to move this along a little bit, right? So this is fascinating stuff because I'm sure there's people walking around unaware that they've got whether big T's or little T's. They're probably aware of the big T's because that's pretty obvious, like something traumatic's happened. But it's the smaller ones. So if we're stepping up and we want to speak, we want to influence, we want to make a difference, we want to raise a family differently, right? How would trauma get in our way? Because as you say, I can find you're finding people that have lived till they're 70 or 80 and they've been okay, supposedly,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I'm saying like, Ross version, Ross from Friends, like okay, inverted commas,
Yeah.
gesture with two fingers for those of you listening on the podcast. But how, like, I guess there's two questions. What are the signs that there's something in my way from your expertise? And then how would it affect my ability to be influential in the space?
So I think the very basic indicator, for want of a better word, is that sense of anxiety and that sense of
Uh-huh.
unease. If there is a sense of anxiety in my own body, for example, I now know that for me, what I will do quite often is pause, even if it's only for a split second. I will pause and I will just do a quick checkout of where I am. Is this a safe place? Am I with safe people? Am I in a safe environment? And if the answer to all of that is yes, then I know that the anxiety is coming from somewhere else. And if it's coming from somewhere else, for example, a past experience that I can't even remember, then the most I can ask of myself at that minute is to be gentle with myself, to stay patient, to take a breath and focus on those things that are really fundamental, which is our breathing, our things like a sip of water, anything at all that just pauses so that we can then recalibrate what's going on in our body and give ourselves a message and say, this anxiety might be coming from something that I can't remember, but I don't need it right now. What I'd like to do is engage, for example, with my child in a slightly different way. And the starting point for behaving differently in the world that is a healthy response to that anxiety is becoming curious and becoming
Uh-huh.
playful. Those two
Okay.
things, those two
Curious and
things
playful.
together, curious and playful, are two of the healthiest ways to begin to retrain almost what's happening in our body. And if we become curious about what's happening and ask questions, and if we become playful about what we're doing, and that might be, curiosity and playfulness can come from lift my pen in my left hand instead of my right, or vice versa. I'm left handed, and write my name down. Just that few seconds of an interruption is enough to shift something in my brain to ask questions and go, why are you doing this differently? That's not, this isn't a major trauma recovery technique. This is about all the small T's.
The little ones,
This
yeah.
is about the little things that allow us to become more comfortable with uncertainty in life, with the unpredictability that's around, with the fact that we can't control the bigger things in life, but we are in control of those smaller things. And playfulness and curiosity are great because they can connect us to people in a much more generous way. If we become playful and we become curious, then we also become more interested and interesting. And those are things for our body that are very healthy. So that's starting points, but that's only little starting points. Clearly,
Yeah,
I
no,
could
of
go
course.
on for
Yeah,
lots and
and
lots about that. But
if this
you're
speaks very,
specifically asking about speaking and speakers, and I think
well,
that's
influencing.
influencing, and influencing one of those things that can hold us back is that anxiety that is an unknown anxiety. So if we can become curious about what we're about to do and become playful about it, then we can be much more powerful as influencers, because we're showing up firstly as a real human being, not someone who has to be in control and knows it all, but someone who's a real human being, who's a little bit vulnerable perhaps, who's interested in others, who's...
Oh, Michelle's frozen again. Interested in others, dare I say, to complete her sentence. There you are. You're back. Yes.
It's not freezing at my side, so I have no
That's quite
idea what's
interesting.
happening. My
It might be,
apologies.
the platform we're using for some reason, because I'm not freezing. I don't know what it is. But anyway, it just happens. It's technology. We live and we keep moving. So carry on. I think I finished your sentence correctly.
I think I think you did, but if there were moments of demonstrating what's going on, this could be one of them where, of course, in my body, I'm going, oh no, it's frozen. I've let Elliot down. I've let the podcast down. And instead of that, what I will do is go, do you know what? It's not my fault. Elliot's equipment's clearly not working. And then I'll take a little sip of water.
Then I'll say, are you a cause or effect there? But we won't go into that right now. I think it's neither of our fault. Something with the technology isn't quite clicking, but that's okay. It just happens. I think when it comes to questions, I just want to come to that. Is why a dangerous question? Because if I'm going, why is this? I don't know the answer, right? Why am I feeling this way? Why is this happening? I'm just wondering from your expertise, is that dangerous? Because I'm seeking an intellectual answer to something that's potentially doesn't have an intellectual base. Emotions aren't intellectually driven, they're emotions, right? They're not rational. So is that a dangerous question? Why?
No, it's not a dangerous question. It's a
Okay.
very healthy question. And in fact, you've answered it without realizing.
Oh, have I?
So, yes, you
Okay.
have.
I'm not just being facey. I'm not just being faced.
So, if we ask why, and the answer is, I don't know why, that is your answer. Why is this happening? I don't know. Let yourself finish that, which is, I don't know. That is it. That is an answer. And once you know you don't know, then you can become curious. I don't know. Well, then I wonder. I wonder, might it have been when I was smaller? Might it have been last week when I met that person in the street who shouted at me? Or I wonder. So we can begin to wonder, but we have answered the question first. Why?
So should you
I
skip
don't
the
know.
why and go to I wonder?
You don't need to split it. I think it's all healthy. I think your brain needs an answer first.
Okay.
So if you say why, I don't know why, then you will go to wonder, as opposed to why, and you sort of know you do know the answer somewhere. It was that person last week who shouted at me, in which case you don't need to wonder. So it's two different
Okay.
processes,
Got it.
two different
Got it.
processes. But what you're doing is bringing together what's happened in your body with the I feel this way, along with your head with the why do I feel this way.
Yeah.
And when you begin to do that, if you wonder, you no longer wonder with your brain. What you begin to do is wonder with your body. I wonder, well, if I'm feeling this way, where am I feeling this way? Is it in my shoulders? Is it in my chest? Is it in my stomach? Is it in my head, in terms of pain or headache, for example? So if you ask why, answer it with I don't know, and then follow it with curiosity about what's happening in your body, you'll get closer to where the actual answer might be. And also the reality is you may never know. So if you take a child, for example, who's 6 months old in a lovely, safe environment, but a cat comes in and drops a little furry toy, and the little body shakes, well, you're not going to remember that. Doesn't matter what age you are. You won't know it. You won't remember it. So you don't always need to know. You need to know that it doesn't feel good. So I want to shift that. I want to change it. I want to check, is it about here and now? And if I can do something differently now, or I want to be patient with myself, compassionate with myself. Compassion's a really difficult thing for people to reach if they have been hurt a lot over life. Self-compassion
Mm.
goes very easily. So becoming compassionate with ourselves starts with a very basic level of acceptance of who I am here and now, regardless
Okay.
of what has come before. And if I can begin with that and begin to appreciate that acceptance, then I can begin to enjoy something a little bit more each time. Now that's, for people who are further down the line of trauma, but for small traumas, the same principles apply.
Yeah. 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 Okay. It's interesting. So compassion, acceptance is a big one. And you say curious and playfulness is
Yeah,
quite interesting.
yeah.
Do you think people go to the other extreme, so they go almost become aggressive and forceful? And I suppose when you're wanting to influence, when we're talking about influence, the sphere of influence, whether community or an audience or online influence, whatever we're talking about, your regimen, right? If you're do people go to the other extreme because of trauma and become almost is the professional term I'm going to use.
Yeah. Lovely. I wouldn't say that it is direct cause and effect in that sense. I don't think they go to aggression because of trauma. I think certainly experiences of trauma can impact any individual, and the outworking of that can be aggressiveness. And it may be they've only ever known aggressiveness themselves. It may be that in order to be seen, they've had to become aggressive. It may be that they've seen others and recognize somebody who's aggressive as being the person who becomes seen. So there's a lot of factors as to why somebody can become aggressive. From my perspective, any hint of aggressiveness for me will immediately have an impact on me, and I'll go, I just don't want to listen to that person. So if there's an influencer and they are speaking in an aggressive tone, I will tend to switch off rather than be influenced. However,
Mhm.
I know others who will go looking for that aggressive tone because it's more familiar to them.
Right.
And they can accept the aggressive tone easier than, for example, someone who comes with a lovely, gentle voice and says, let's just
Right.
talk softly to you. That can be really intimidating and scary if your world lens is an aggressive
Yeah.
lens to begin with. So I would say it totally depends on the person and their experiences to date if they want to influence. Also, knowing your audience well. If you're an influencer, you do, of course, want to know who is your audience and how will they respond? How will they
Yep.
best respond and what's most useful for them? So a
No,
healthy aggressiveness, as I'm sure most of anyone listening to this will know, healthy version of aggressiveness, I'll use your inverted commas, is assertiveness. So being assertive is not the same as being aggressive. And being
right.
assertive is simply knowing you have a clear message, you need to speak it, you need to say it clearly, you know you've got your facts and should be statistics, whatever it is, and you can assert those. That's different than aggressiveness, which is a push against whoever's in front of you.
Is it ever too late to address your trauma?
Is
Is it ever too late to
to
deal with your
to
trauma?
deal with trauma. No, never. As I've said, folks now
The 70s and 80s, I guess you're going to say. You're frozen again, just so you know why I'm talking, in case you think
experienced a
I'm
lot
talking.
of trauma already.
There you go. Sorry, you froze again. So, folks in the ages, I think I said what you're going to say. 70s and 80s is probably what you said.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
never too late. And for some people in their 80s, they will have experienced less trauma than someone who might be 16.
Right,
So,
because it's different times.
yeah. And I think it's important to emphasize that, because if you're 16 and thinking, I might have to wait until I'm 89 before I can resolve this, then that's not good. So, especially at this current point in time, for young people of all ages, they need a clear message that says it's not too late. It's never too late to deal with it, but equally, it's never too soon to start dealing with it. So, you don't need to put that off. If you want to achieve anything in life, if you want to invest yourself in a life that's enjoyable, and life isn't working around you at the minute, just find someone somewhere, anywhere who can get alongside you. And a lot of community work, for example, focuses on that these days, which is making sure that everyone has someone that they can get alongside, anyone who is a trusted other person, trusted adult.
I love that. So, as we start to wrap up today, what would be like your top three tips for people who want to be more influential, even if they're influential already, or want to be, look, I want to speak up, I want to share my story, I want, to bring down this government, I want to destroy the energy, companies in the world. Like, what would be your first kind of three juicy tips to help them achieve that
Well,
from dealing with trauma, not
well,
dealing with trauma?
I'll give you a quote as the first one, which I think is unquestionably the most powerful quote that I have come across, one of the most powerful quotes that is directly relevant to what you've just asked. And that's a quote by St. Francis de Sales. And I'll just read it to make sure I don't get it wrong. But nothing is so strong as gentleness, and nothing so gentle as real strength.
Mm.
I think those two halves of the world, to me, are the starting points for any influencers. Gentleness and strength go hand in hand. And real strength is very gentle. And real gentleness is very strong.
Oh, I like
And I
that.
think that's a lovely starting point.
Yeah, I love that.
I think if there was a second tip, it is to approach anything in life with the knowledge that it is very likely whoever your audience is has been impacted by trauma, whether it be individual, whether it be collective, whether it be as a society. I think the knowledge that we have these days would let us know that everyone has been impacted in some way or other by small traumas and a lot more big traumas than we would have recognized. And I think that's important because your audience is going to respond through their lens. And if you come from a starting point of everyone's had something, then you can approach it with slightly different ways. So I'll give you another little quote for that one. And this is one that I
Yeah.
also love, and it's very much about the work that I do. And it's from Ernest Hemingway, who came back after the First World War as a young man. having been in the ambulance service at that point and had been very badly injured himself, but seen a lot of his friends injured and killed. And his quote I just love, which is, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward some are strong at the broken places." And knowing that there can be strength, but what he doesn't say is all are strong. So it's also a myth to say everybody gets stronger because of trauma. They don't. But some are, if they get the right support in the right environment. And if you're an influencer in front of people, knowing that people have been hurt means that you're wanting to give them something that feels nurturing, no matter how strong the message is about the economy or politics or whatever it might be. Everyone has something. So I think that's the second one. And I think the third one for me, in terms of influencers, and it applies to any of us as individuals, is just that sense of patience. Be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, allow yourself to do the best you can at any given moment, but knowing that is the best you can give at any given moment. And it might not be what you gave yesterday, and it might not be what you give tomorrow, but it's the best you can give right now. And if you give the best you can at this given moment with what you have, then you'll influence. So there's another quote, which is Arthur Ashe, who says that start where you are, use what you have, and that's, to me, that's it. You start where you are with what you've got.
I love that. Thank you so much, Michelle. So, how do
Thank you,
people
Elliot.
reach out, connect with you, ask you questions?
So, are you
I
there now?
didn't get that.
You've now frozen on
Siri
me.
just kicked off. Sorry, Siri. I don't know what's going on today
So
with
Siri wants
technology
to know.
confusing. Yeah, Siri wants to know to get in touch with you. Go for it, Michelle.
So my so the name of my business is Kintsugi. I'll spell that because it is a bit strange. So Kin and Sugi is Kin and then Tsugi, Kintsugi Healing. And Kintsugi is that Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. So golden joinery. Kintsugi is golden joinery. So Kintsugi Healing, and that's kintsugihealing.com or Michelle at kintsugihealing.com. That's
And
it.
on LinkedIn, you're on LinkedIn, right?
I'm on
Any other
LinkedIn, and
channels?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, and I'll be completely honest, because this is a useful way to be honest. I have been incredibly quiet on any social media channels over the last 2 months, and that has been a deliberate, conscious choice. And it is about a time in my life and my world where things became unpredictable, unexpected. Just there has been a lot going on, and social media was not helping me. And by that I mean, by definition, because of the work I do, the algorithms and the feeds are feeding me everything that there is to know about trauma and suicide prevention and mental health and illness. And this is just something to note in terms of influencers. That's one of the things to become aware of. So I have managed it by slowing down. Now, given that I'm here today and you're about to put this out there live or already live or whatever,
You're already on LinkedIn.
this is my
Look at
prompt.
you.
This is my prompt to say that this was my planning, was that at the beginning of October I'll come back on and get invested in that again. But I took a pause from that, and that was my own way of saying, do you know what? I need nurtured. I need looked after. I need time out. So we're back.
Fantastic. Welcome back. So, to everybody listening today to the Public Speaking Expert podcast, this is our first of many, and this series about influence and how you can find tools and various techniques and various experts to be more influential in your space. If I remember correctly, and I believe I've been listening, let's get curious. Let's find out what's in our way. Let's get playful with it. But let's accept where we are. Use that as the beginning. Wherever we are right now is okay. Lots of self compassion. You might not know the answer, but just know it's getting in the way. And by doing that, you give yourself the best opportunity to deal with it, to heal it, to move forwards. Seek help. No one is an island. No one knows everything, believe it or not. Even I don't know everything. Turn to Michelle, someone like Michelle, who can help you unlock that. You might not know what started it, but you certainly know how to deal with it, right? I love that quote. That gentleness is strength, and strength is being gentle. And I think that's absolutely what is needed in today's world, We need people who are gently strong and strong with gentleness. There's too much aggression. There's too much